Okay, again, if you're just joining us live from Athens, you are seeing the scene of a square in which Syntagma Square is the name of where the Parliament of Greek sits, of which there are debates being held there for what is deemed as a means to stop the rising debt, generally speaking, and that is austerity measures on top of the debate that's going on, of which they're calling it a midterm plan for discussion. And why is this the venue for the protesters, these Greek protesters, to have come out, of which we're seeing the height of some of the tension, which shows the police facing off with the protesters, and that is they want to stop the midterm plan, which is under discussion in Parliament. Now, the protesters have gathered in numbers that has swelled to about maybe tens of thousands, of which we're seeing a confrontation taking place between some of the security personnel involving police officers and the angry Greeks. Now, there's a couple developments in this that's very interesting. The EU and the IMF, which are the major European lenders of trying to rescue Greece, they have set pressure on the Prime Minister, George Papandreou, in order to get this 5-year plan to be put under vote and get approved before they can have the additional 110 billion additional funding in order to help Greece so that they wouldn't opt for a default. Now, that's one development. They need this approval of the cabinet inside the parliament, which is taking place right now. Now, the other side of this story is that there are some members within George Papandreou's government who are actually against the new austerity cuts. They're against the further addition, and that poses not only a new challenge for Papandreou, but it also exerts a lot of pressure, obviously, for this bailout to actually occur. The neighborhood of around 300 billion is what this bailout amounts to. But what that means, not to get into too much of an economy discussion here, or financial discussion for what it means for the Greeks, it means that their future, first of all, in terms of the austerity cuts, looks bleak. Job cuts involve always a grim scenario for any general public. We've seen that in the UK. We've seen that in many parts of the world. Of course, one we don't hear about much, only in terms of unemployment, it comes from the United States. But taking a look at some of the scenes, not to get into that discussion as of yet, we can see the Greeks and their anger. And of course, looking at some of those protesters there, they're carrying what appears to be some steel rods, which is in their hands. And as this anger fuels, it poses a danger. Let's cross on over to our correspondent right now, Michael Kosmidis, who joins us from the capital, Athens. Well, Michael, we're looking at another outburst here, which involves face-off between the Greek police and, of course, the protesters. Tell us what you can. You're there in Greece.
There is, of course, yeah. I mean, there's a slight difference, I should say now. I mean, obviously, tear gas is there, as we've seen it before. Stun grenades are there, we've seen it before. Youths hurling stones and other, the police and so on is there. The difference is that the main core of this big demonstration is against effectively all sorts of violence. They want it to be peaceful and they want to stay there in front of the parliament effectively for day long. It's a 24-hour strike, so they want to stay there for 24 hours. What we have is, I would say, something like 200, 300, nobody knows the exact, of youths whom you might, I don't know, you might call them anarchists or whatever, or extreme leftists, or just very angry youth of Greece, who are hurling stones at the police. Earlier on in the day, during the first scuffles, quite a few groups from the main demonstration tried to intervene, and they managed to sort of mediate, if you like, and tone down the whole thing. But apparently now there is much more tension in Syntagma Square in front of the parliament, and there is confrontation between these 200-300 people and the police. I must stress this out. This is what the images you are seeing and people are saying on their TV. It has to do with a group of demonstrators attacking the police. The main mass of the demonstration is still there. Hopefully, if things do not escalate, pretty dramatically, they will still be there for quite some time. Having said that, obviously there's lots of tear gas in the square right now, so it's not the most comfortable place to be. So I would assume that quite a few of the demonstrators will have problems. But there is all sorts of effort being made to keep the demonstration as peaceful as possible. And if you like, just have this group of people who want to fight with the police sort of separated from the main group of the demonstration. So that's the situation.
Well, Michael,
right
if you can, I'm sorry to jump in, Michael. Let me just ask you. I'm sorry, Michael. Let me just ask you about this meeting that's reportedly took place between George Papandreou and the president. Do you have any details about that meeting?
Sure, there was this meeting. Actually, Mr. Papandreou, the Prime Minister, called it. Nobody was quite certain what was it about. In the end, what it seems that it was all about, it was one more attempt by the Prime Minister to reach out to the other parties. The big issue here is consensus. The European Union, the IMF, the European Central Bank, the creditors, the lenders, want some kind of consensus between the political parties. This is not achieved yet, and this is nowhere to be seen. It's not visible right now. All the parties say that they disagree with the situation and the agreement of the government as it goes. Mr. Papandreou saw the president earlier, and he said that he pointed out how difficult the situation for the country is and how he wants a consensus to be reached. What we believe is happening is that he's asked the president to somehow try and intervene once more and maybe ask leaders of the other parties again to discuss and then find some sort of common ground. This has been done about a couple of weeks ago. It didn't work out, and it's difficult to see how it's going to proceed from here. Someone has to give away something. The government has to give away something, and this has to be something substantial, something that the opposition, Conservative, New Democratic Party, for example, can hold on to and tell to its members and to its supporters that, yes, it's enough of a thing to move on and agree with the government, that we agree with what's going on. So
well, Michael, Michael, the big question comes here. I mean, in all fairness to the Greeks, we look at the demand that the EU and the IMF are actually placing on the parties. They want to support for this package ahead of this June 20th and June 23rd, 24th meeting that the EU finance ministers are having. But at the same time, what about the Greeks themselves? I mean, they want the support from within the government of Greece, but it seems like the Greeks are being left out in the cold, doesn't it? And that's what Greeks are coming out, as we're seeing live images there in Athens, showing and venting their anger.
You're absolutely right, and in fact you don't even have to wait for the demonstrations and for the strikes to see that. If you only see the polls that they are going out in Greece almost daily, it's pretty obvious that the huge percentage of Greeks do not think that this agreement is fair for them, but most importantly to an extent, or related to it, they don't believe that this is going to lead anywhere. They don't think that if they sacrifice their working rights, if they sacrifice their income, if they sacrifice anything, this is going to be something positive in 2, 3, 5, whatever years. So the Greeks themselves have been left out, I would say, both from the creditors of Greece, who actually what they want is probably their money back or something like that, but also from the political system itself, who seems not to realize that what we are seeing now in these protests, it's a disbelief, it's the anger of Greeks, not just against Mr. Papandreou's party, PASOK, not just against the opposition party. It's an anger against the whole political system that led the country into the financial situation that it is right now, and of course is leading into the situation that it is right now with all their rights and being completely hit and destroyed. So I think it goes much deeper than just a reaction to the austerity measures.
Right, Michael. I need to jump in here, Michael. I'm sorry. I need to jump in because we just there were just some scenes being played out of some of these protesters apparently being beaten up by police, and I say apparently because if you can tell us, Michael, we're seeing not only the uniformed police, but we're also seeing what appears to be plainclothes civilians, but yet they're beating up on protesters. I'm curious, at least that's what is apparently being shown there. Are there two different types of security personnel?
Well, the civilians, you see, people with civilian clothes would be either be policemen in civilian clothing, which at this stage would be a bit tricky to imply. I would imagine, of course, we don't know the specific incident, but I would imagine it's more likely, as I said earlier, demonstrators from the main demonstration itself being angry at the youth who are in some way destroying or creating problems to the thousands of people who plan to demonstrate peacefully in front of the park.
Okay, Michael, let me ask you this then, Michael, as we look at all these protesters.
There is some sort of...
Michael, as we're looking at these protesters, just to save time, get to the heart of the matter, again, we'd like to find out from you, how much further do you think this time around we're going to see protests take place and the duration of time? We know one of the biggest unions out in Greece that represents 500,000 workers have said, we're not going to leave the square until this bill is not passed, something to that effect. Yeah. And they represent 500,000 workers. So do you have an idea, an inkling as to how long the strike and also the protests are going to take place?
The protests will continue in the strike. I mean, obviously now it's a 24-hour, but there are others to come. From the beginning of the year, and of course since last year when the whole problem started, the demonstrations are almost endless. If it's not a general strike of the unions, it represents the whole sector, if you like, of the private workers or the public workers. It's all the other unions from various sectors in labs work that are actually on strike daily. So there's lots of anger and there's lots of determination there to keep going until this thing is resolved. I believe the only resolution, if you ask me personally, has to be in the parliament, will be in the parliament one way or another, which means either the governing party will manage to get the bill through, and then it must find a way to enforce it, or what it seems not very unlikely at this stage, at least, they will not manage to get the bill through. In that sense, the demonstrations will have won a victory, at least for the time being, and then the most likely outcome would be some kind either of snap elections or maybe some sort of vote on the memorandum itself, getting the memorandum into a referendum to the people to decide themselves whether they agree with it or not.
And also, your take, if you can, Michael, how far do you think the police will go in terms of the way they're going to exercise the force based on the situation on the ground with these demonstrators? Obviously, if any serious incident happens, that will reflect negatively on not only the police, but the government of Papandreou, given the severity of people's frustration with their lives there in Athens and Greece. Well, looks like we lost Michael. You're looking at live images there in the capital, Athens, in which some of the protesters are apparently throwing some types of objects towards the police, perhaps throwing objects at some of the buildings there, showing their frustration against what is become very close for Greece of a default based on the loans that they have gotten from the IMF and the EU and some European lenders in order to save their country, in a matter of speaking. Of course, a big portion of this involves austerity cuts, of which that's another, perhaps a major reason why these protesters are out there, because, well, not only jobs are being cut, it's going to be hard to get a job. Unemployment figures, some are saying it's as high as 46%. Of course, that depends on which segment of the population we're talking about, but anything over 20%, to say the least, is very high. We can talk about Spain, another country in Europe, of which on paper it's cited to be around 20-25%, but they're saying that it's, some are saying and speculating that it's much higher than that, but resulting in frustration, in anger, and that's what's being played out there in the streets in Athens from the Greeks. Two different shots for you there. We saw some protesters actually being beat up by police. The crowd has swelled up to thousands. as we speak. Probably in Parliament, the debate is being thrown around in terms of what is called the medium-term austerity program. It's pretty complicated to talk about the Greece bailout that is occurring. But overall, pressure is growing on Papandreou's government, of which he's trying to muster support for this 5-year plan. A 5-year plan which is being accepted by Greece, because apparently they have no choice but to accept this from the international lenders, which include the EU and the IMF, in order for them to extend more funding, as for Athens not to go through a default. But live there from Athens, the latest scenes. That's a question best left for an economist or a financial specialist as to whether Greece is going to actually be able to even pay back what amounts to about 300 plus billion euro bailout that's being exercised on this on Greece. Big source of revenue for Greece obviously comes in the form of tourism. We can see how severely that's been affected. But Greeks are very pessimistic in terms of their future there. Let's recount what some Greeks feel. It'd be worth to put that in here. we're going to take a look at a nurse here. It says, what can we do? We have to fight for our children and for us. This is a nurse at a state hospital. She says that after 25 years of work, she's earning 1,100 euros a month. That's going to drop to 900. And then how it's affecting future generations, where her daughter says that she has to seek a university abroad to pursue her studies in order to find a job abroad because there are no jobs in Greece. But in terms of what is going on, it's going to be very interesting of how Papandreou is going to even survive this bailout deal with the elections of 2013. And within his own party, there are some members who are against the new austerity cuts which come through with the new bailout amount which is being exercised by the European lenders. And at times we have seen these protests turn a bit violent, if we can call it a violence that's been maintained rather well by the security forces there. But these things can escalate very quickly in terms of the tension, and of course the end result being the violence in form of clash, in terms of clashes that may erupt. The clashes have actually erupted, but there have been some minor scuffles. Nothing too serious. A few protesters were beaten up. But if you look very closely, some of these protesters are carrying some wooden sticks or perhaps another form of sticks, whether it's made of steel or not. That's for speculation. We can't tell. And some of the smoke you see there are from what we're assuming to be tear gas that's thrown by the police officers. You can see there disagreements within the party, as is indicating there on your screen. The ruling party MP, one of them anyways, leaves the cabinet protesting the new austerity measures. You could take a closer look at what that really means for Papandreou. Of course, the pressure is mounting on him. He needs to get the approval in order to go ahead with the upcoming meeting, in order to get this additional loan, in hopes of restarting economic activity in Greece. The Conservative Opposition Party, New Democracy, that's one of the opposition parties of against Papandreou. They have refused to back the plan. And as I was indicating about Papandreou's party himself, the PASOK party, well, it needs a majority in order to pass the package, but that has even given more pressure to Papandreou. It has fallen behind in opinion polls on top. And what they're against is the new austerity measures to take place. And right now we're seeing some of the protesters at the streets still continuing with their protest. One of the major unions, Austerity in Greece, which represents 500,000 workers, it's a big union representing that many people. They have vowed to stay out on the streets in order to stop not only the austerity measures to take place, obviously with the new additional loan that Greece is requesting. Of course, whether that's going to work or not, I can't say they can be too optimistic on that. And, of course, what that means for Greece, how much further they're going to continue, that's going to remain to be seen. We've seen in the past few weeks these demonstrations and protests to escalate. And, of course, it does show the state of affairs, especially in Europe, really all across Europe. It's not just limited to EU countries. Austerity, it's the age of austerity, as they say. Whether it's the UK you're talking about, or whether it's Spain, and in this case in point, we're seeing Greece to be going through the biggest, one of the biggest bailouts of over 350 billion euros, roughly. Well, unfortunately, we had more news to tell you, but we've ran out of time, which leaves us enough to say goodbye. But our website is waiting for you. Just a click away, presstv.ir. Do log on to get the latest developments. For now, we're going to say goodbye, leave you with some images there in the capital of Greece, Athens. And at the top of the hour, we'll be back with news in brief. Do stay with us.